So displaying the list of movies seems to work really well, and we can verify that right now by going to our web browser and just looking at the list of movies. And there they are. So I'm going to go back to the home page. Then I'm going to go back to my code, and I'm going to simulate a network error. And I'll do that just by changing the URL, by adding a couple of X's at the end of it. So that's actually going to generate a 404 page not found error from our REST backend. And if I go back to my web browser now, and I have the JavaScript console open, so you'll see there will be an error, but look at what the end user sees. It just goes to loading, and it stays there forever. Now the actual error is JSON parse, unexpected non-white space character, and so on and so forth. That's because it's not getting JSON back. It's actually getting a page not found, 404 error. And we have no way of letting the user know that something went wrong. So we probably should address that. So I'm going to go back to my code. And the very first thing I'm going to do is I'll add a new item to my state, and I'll call it error. And its initial value will be null, like that. And I'm going to fix this URL right now, and we'll change it back in a moment. The next thing I'll do is down here, in my render function, I want to have access to that error variable. So I'll just say error, like that. And that will grab it from state and populate a local variable named error. Now in my component did mount function, I'm going to comment out this first line, and we'll get rid of it in a minute. And I'm going to replace it with something else. Then, and I'm going to take response and use an arrow function. And inside of that, first thing I'll do is say console.log status code is, and then response.status. And that will be set to 200, the string 200, if everything worked as expected. But if we get a 404 page not found, then it will be the string 404. If there's an error of 500, we'll get the string 500. The point is, this is something I can actually test against. So I'll write an if statement here. If response.status is not exactly equal to 200, then something went wrong. So what I'll do is generate a new error, an actual JavaScript error. So I'll create a variable, which I'll call err, and that's equal to error. And that gives me a new empty JavaScript error. And I'll populate its message, err.message, is equal to invalid response code. And then I'll just append response.status. And then I'll set the state. This.setState. And I'm setting the state for error will be equal to err, like that. And then, after the if statement, I'll just return response.json. Now there's one more change that we have to make here. Okay? Well, actually a couple of more changes. But in this last then statement, then JSON arrow function, after its closing curly bracket and before the closing parentheses, we need to add this. Error and an arrow function. This.setState, and we'll set a couple of things here. We can say is loaded is true, and just because I'm like this, I'll set error as well. Okay? And we need a semicolon right here. Now the last thing I'll change is down here. We need to use this error function. So this becomes an else if. And on the line just before it, we can say if error, and I'll move this curly bracket down here so it's a little more attractive. And here, I'll return a div error, and then my error message, error.message. Now, if we did everything right now, I have a valid URL, so I should be able to go back and actually look at the list of movies and get it, and there should be no error in the JavaScript console. So let's try it. Movies. We got status code is 200, and it displays the list of movies. Let's go back to the home page, and let's put an invalid URL in there. And now we'll come back and say movies, and it says error, invalid response code 404. Now that is a much more useful way of giving meaningful feedback to the user. And this is just a simple example of how you can trap for errors. There are many ways of doing it, but this actually works pretty well. And one other nice feature about this is the fact that we're using our error checking or doing our error checking this way on line 28 through 33, instead of using a catch block that's available to us in JavaScript. What would happen if we used a catch block is that we might have actual bugs in our component that we never see, and we think it's a network error instead. And this makes sure that if there's a bug in the component, we'll actually get meaningful feedback from React. And if there's a problem with our network transport, then we'll get an error message. And it keeps our error handling much, much simpler. All right, let's move on.